Sam Potter sat next to them, sorting through the pieces to find the ones he wanted. The game was played like Monopoly, but a second round of properties matched those on the outer edge of the board, representing non-wizard properties on the usual Monopoly board. The others wizarding locations such as Hedgewoods, Diagonally, Durmstrang, Rostrap, Stonehenge, and so on. The boys pulled up a chair each, smiling around as the game pieces began to get organized. From out of the kitchen door Ron appeared, breaking off from Harry and Hermione's meeting with Snape and, spying his girlfriend, pulled a chair between her and the twin who turned out to be George. Septimus had sat next to Sam, who was watching the party guests as well as the game set up, nodded briefly to him, and Septimus wondered whether he still felt the guilt he had done over Septimus's lightning shot at the Halloween games. His initial expression towards Septimus seemed to indicate some lingering memory of it, though his complexion brightening, pulling out of his former reticence as the sound of Septimus's voice. "How is Crystalia?" asked Septimus boldly, as he chose a unicorn and a rabbit as his pieces for the game. "Better," Sam replied, placing his hippogriff and top hat on the go space next to the small, but growing, collection of playing pieces. The board jolted a little as Freya got up, slipping out of the back of the group and heading quickly through the kitchen door. She'll be with her family in Iceland by now. Septimus watched as Sam's face fell at his separation from his girlfriend. She had a particular magic which is helped when she is at home. "I am sorry about your dad," he continued, changing the subject and, smiling kindly at Septimus, passed the dice. "I'm so sorry that he is still so ill. At least I'll have my mum. Uncle Kay is bringing her here tonight. And we'll visit. And she has worked on a cure for Dad. I spoke to her with Professor Snape. He said that together they had made a lot of progress. She's bringing it with her tonight to give him." Septimus felt happiness glowing in his heart. If this was what Christmas was supposed to be about, happiness being brought about by the birth of Christ, then no amount of party food and games and presents from his friends would beat knowing that there was a real chance for his dad. Septimus threw the dice that Sam had passed him and threw a double 3. "Gringot Spank pays me 100 sickles," Septimus read, and immediately his little pile of Diopoly Wizards money grew as 100 sickle pieces flew over from the game's bank tray. "Wow," he added, at his game money. "At least you were cured pretty quickly," said Percy Weasley to Sirius, who had joined them, sitting himself between his twin brothers. At least Snape had some lead, with lycanthropy. "But it still took a while for you." "Then," growled back Sirius, "it would have been all the better if the Ministry could have taken a zero-tolerance line on embracing half-breeds in Britain, rather than an open-door policy." He stared pointedly at Percy, who had indeed voted for the latter. "I've got Nocturne Alley," declared Fred Weasley, as if to drown out a potential argument between the two by narrating the game very loudly. "And I've also got Shimbleshanks, so that means I can buy a house." He selected a green, plastic house from the tray, the money for which was automatically flown from his pile to the bank. "I'll put it on." A door banged loudly, as Fred announced, "Nocturne Alley," at which his brother declared that, even though he had a house, it was on the cheapest set of property on the board. But Septimus had turned his head at the noise, looking around for Uncle Kay and Mum. A few other heads turned, including Darren Black, and also Harry and Hermione. Harry got to his feet when he saw Severus, Hermione having nudged him, and she followed him as Harry walked purposefully to the latest arrival. "Not Callias," whispered Sam as he took in Septimus' forlorn face. "He won't be long. And then it won't be long until we have the speech from the head of the reciprocators," added Sirius. "I just wonder what Cleus will have to say." Speech. It was Rufus who asked the question. All of the Diopoly players paused as Sirius explained. "Ever since Joseph Black began the reciprocators, we have had a Christmas party on Christmas Day. Up until 2 years ago, that is, when Aberforth passed on to the spirit world. But, Callias promised this time. Yeah, chipped in Ron, as his friends stepped through into the hall with Snape. Snape passed it all over to Callias now, so there's no excuse that neither of them had checked that the other had prepared a speech. Tonks, who had now come over to the ever-growing Diapaly players, gave him a stern look. I don't think it's like that, Ron, she corrected. I mean, if you look at what we've all been through in the last 2 years. All I'm saying is, traditions should be upheld. He grinned as his brothers gave Sam Potter the dice. Traditions like, giving your girlfriend so much to drink she throws up. Ginny Weasley, who had followed Tonks over to the game, folded her arms across her burgundy strapless dress and frowned at her brother. I thought you were looking after her. Tonks looked at Ginny in alarm, before padding across the wooden floorboards purposefully and pushing on the kitchen door. Not me, protested Ron, getting up too, making to follow Tonks. I gave her pumpkin juice, that's all. Well, it wasn't pumpkin juice which is making her sick all in the sink right now. As her brother pushed past his little sister, Ginny added, but perhaps it wasn't Ron giving her drinks all night, was it? She fixed a stare on Sirius, then adding, and inappropriate conversation, before following him into the kitchen, who slipped back into his chair a little as Fred Weasley handed a triumphant Darren a galleon for landing on free broom parking while George bought the 3 broomsticks, one of 2 from the cheaper end of the Diapaly board, and was busy trying to barter for the other, the hogshead from Sam. He works at British Flu, with Dudley, whispered Darren to Septimus and Rufus. I didn't know his girlfriend was Freya though, I thought she was still Dudley's girlfriend. Dudley, who was having a conversation with Arthur Weasley, his head close to the green flames in the fireplace, was in full flow, and Septimus noticed his and Darren's mum had come over to get his attention. Dudley nearly hit his head on the brick chimney breast in shock. You too, Darren, she called, walking over to her younger son. To Sirius, who was sitting back now watching the Diapaly game, rather than participating in it, she smiled and thanked him for inviting them, commenting that Regulus rarely has time to see him, and he was pleased to have come tonight. You'll be missing the speech, replied Sirius, resignation in his voice, glancing at the kitchen door. But I am always glad to see you and my brother, Petunia, you know that. Petunia bent towards her brother-in-law and, speaking softly, said, us too. Make sure you have whatever Severus Snape gives you for your illness. I have every faith you can reconcile your mind to this and find peace within yourself, Sirius. Then, she stood back up, rounding Sirius's old, green leather chair, making for her younger son. I'm taking Anne back too, as well as Dudley and Darren, she continued, smiling at a reluctant Darren. We have an early start in the morning so we can get to Wembley and the Quibball match. Gotta go, said Darren, smiling wanly at his friends. I'd like to stay, but we do have to go. Thank your mum again, Rufus. Yes, replied Rufus Lestrange, simply. Yes, thank your mum, Rufus, Petunia added, holding out a hand encouragingly to Darren. I have a lot to get on with for tomorrow. Say goodbye to your mum for me, won't you, Sam, dear? And give my love to Harry? I saw him here just now. We're going to, announced Bellatrix, Rodolphus next to her, beaming. We'll see you tomorrow night. You are next to us, the boys can sit by one another. Darren grinned, looking across to Rufus, who was playing with his portable pensieve, and nudged his friend, who hadn't been at all listening. Septimus laughed, feeling a little pang of sadness that both he and Rufus had to go now. Is that Severus Snape I saw just now arriving? Re-arriving, that is? Asked Bellatrix. I must just find him before we leave, Rod. I need to ask him about the Quibball arrangements for Hedgewood's next term. So much for a fast getaway, declared Rodolphus, sitting down in the place just vacated by Darren. I may as well join you. There's no such thing as a quick word when Bella decides to talk about sport. Out in the hall a conversation of a different kind was being had, between Severus Snape and the reluctant keepers of a set of books, papers and parchments which had been driven to them to distraction. Hermione had used her small clutch bag to contain it all and had handed it over to Snape, who she had told what would happen if he opened it. "My thanks," Snape replied, as Bellatrix opened the door on their conversation, and most of the party who cared to listen heard their conversation. "You did indeed bring these to me at the correct time. There seems to be a certain amount of difficulty for Cleus this evening, which is why he is not yet here. That they have reacted in this way is most perturbing." Septimus, who was one of those listening, did not, however, have a chance to hear the end of the sentence, for, as he noticed Bellatrix, a flash of green illuminated the room from the fireplace which Dudley and Arthur had just been inspecting. James Potter was next to it and he put his head into it to collect the message, kneeling quickly, then, hurrying towards the kitchen, pushing it open with a bang. A quick jerk of his head in Severus's direction as he did so. "Lily?" he shouted. "Lily?" The door closed quickly as another flash of green brought Cleus Lupin by flew to the party, apparating to Severus's right, in the hall, opposite Harry, Hermione, and Bella Lestrange. Septimus got to his feet. "Uncle K. He was here at last with Mum." He stepped over Rufus's feet and his dad's legs to get to the hall, watching his uncle's face as the thoughts he had bottled up over the last few days flooded over him. At Christmas with Mum. Being with her. Talking to her. Seeing Dad. "Where's James?" Cleus looked at Severus, expecting an answer, but when he didn't get one within a couple of seconds he added, "James need to help. He needs to organize." "What does he need to organize?" asked Snape, as Cleus stepped into the room, Bing still crooning into the easy-going atmosphere, albeit one which had just been disturbed by a loud operation. "The reciprocators. There's been attacks. More than we could anticipate. Around them." The room began to fall silent, small pockets here and there as attention fell to Cleus. "What sort of attacks, Cleus?" Septimus, his eyes still on his uncle, drew them away and to the voice asking the question. Anne Blewett, her face pale, has stepped from Petunia Black's side and was speaking to the Minister for Magic, who she had last seen not 2 months before, at the trial of her husband. "Attacks on non-wizards, and wizards too," Cleus added, over the unified intake of breath. "James will probably need the NWRs tonight," he added, looking at Petunia, who had, like the rest of the room, gone still. "There will to get an early start for the quibble dissipating quickly. Regulus," she turned to her husband. "Take Darren and Dudley home. I'll come when I've finished here, and Anne." Her friend nodded almost immediately, taking a few steps back so that she was by Petunia again. Bellatrix declared the same of Rodolph as for Rufus, and the Lestranges too flew home. "We will do all you deem necessary," Petunia nodded, as Regulus flew with Darren and Dudley. "Not me," said Cleus. "I am." But before Cleus could continue what he was saying, the door to the kitchen burst open, James Potter waking out very quickly, his head bowed, his wife behind him, screaming at him. "How could you? How could you? How could you is what I want to know, James. After Sam. After everything, I mean. We need to talk about this later. I need to speak to Dash." "James!" exclaimed Cleus. "Cleus." He turned to the Minister for Magic, adding, "What exactly do you need us to do?" "It is not I who can make these decisions now," Cleus replied, standing away from James as the head of the reciprocators, yet to be ratified, stood at the center of them all, his wife's incandescent rage glowing behind him. "I have done what I think is necessary for the viable continuation of this organization," Cleus began, addressing the Christmas party guests. "When we agreed powers, we took this as validation for emergency situation. I have seceded headship of the reciprocators to James Potter. Anyone object to my formal resignation? I do, shrieked Lily, glaring at her husband. One, counted Sirius, looking round his living room. One, he confirmed. There is a majority, Cilius. Cilius Lupin took a step back, then stared at Severus Snape, who, at once, disapparated. No! Screamed Lily Potter, no! She bore down on her husband, for whom there had not been sufficient will from the reciprocators to deny him a leadership. Lily, said James, calmly. Didn't you hear what I was trying to tell you? He stabbed a finger towards the kitchen door. I heard it, Lily retorted. But that does not mean I agree with it. But before she could continue, Snape reapparated in the living room. Cilius looked at him, desperately. No, he replied, glancing at Septimus. Neither can I find her. Everything? Everything I know, or is within my capability to do, Cilius, taking in his pained expression. You need to try again, Severus, we need to try again. If she is missing, it could be catastrophic for everything we have worked towards. If WHO is missing? Asked Harry, still standing in the doorway between Grimmauld Place's living room and hallway, with Hermione. But before anyone could answer, Lily once again turned to her husband. All of this means nothing. Nothing. She raged. Did anyone not think? You are outrageous. She glared at Cilius, then Severus, before turning back to James. I need you. Sam needs you. Sam looked at his father now, then briefly at his mum, before looking across to his brother. Harry said nothing as their mother raged on. Someone's missing. So what? He is lying there, ill. No one to help. She put the tips of her fingers to her head, pushing them through her red auburn locks, then turned to Cilius. Is it true, what he told me? Lily stabbed a finger at James, her face red with ire. What true? Don't give me that. You have handed not only the title but the responsibilities of the reciprocators over to him? I took emergency measures, Lily. Tonight, people are dying. We must act quickly in order to prevent what is unfolding. He looked at James, wordlessly urging him to say something. There are always people dying. And we always have to deal with that. How is it any different from any other night? It isn't, Cilius admitted to a sullen Lily, and to the rest of the room. It's what we do. And, just as Lily was about to say the words, Septimus realized something. Cilius was alone. And you have brought her? Cecilia ... Lupin? Lily spat the words, with venom. Yes, where is Cecilia? Asked Harry, feeling the weight of the burden in Hermione's blue velvet bag, now in Severus's possession, at the back of his mind. Missing. We believe the enemy may have dash. Hold on, said Severus. We need to rule out every avenue first, before we presume. Your contact at Durmstrang? Says she is gone, replied Cilius, quickly. She is no longer at the castle, and her boat has gone. I'll send her as for now. I need you here, Snape, to agree with James the reciprocator's position. So? Lily angry, she is more important, schedule's more important, reciprocator shifts more important. She wheeled round to her husband. You say you are supporting Sam. How could you be if you've taken on this? How did you, anyway, without a vote? Emergency proxy vote, as I said. And what has just been confirmed? We voted for James to replace me in October, clarified Cilius. I took that consent as binding for transfer wholly, under the circumstances. You just don't care about him at all, do you? Your own brother. She stabbed her finger in Cilius's direction. You, Cilius Lupin, you don't. You come here, mindful of organizing people onto shift, mindful of the ministry. Not one of you cares if he lives or dies. That is not true. Sirius got up from his chair slowly, with difficulty, supporting himself on the arm of his chair, waving off help from Fred Weasley. People do care about realms, Lily, Septimus, for example. He looked across at the boy, who was still staring at his uncle. Callias does. He took in Lily's disbelieving expression. I was there, Lily, I went there. With Remus ... terrifying, terrifying. It was. Callias does his job as minister now, depriving himself of life, of rest, to keep all of this out of our lives. Sirius stepped forward towards James uneasily, his former strength not having returned and his balance betraying him a little. I was there and was terrifying. I am still ill now. If our help stops this happening to anyone else, Lils, we simply must always continue. And besides, Severus is working on a potion with Constantin and Buttons ... There is a bigger picture here. There is a war that needs ending. You say Callias doesn't care. He has so much to do, and I for one apologize that I doubted you. He fixed his eyes on the Minister for Magic. Callias slowly nodded his head, in comprehension. Sirius turned his impromptu speech back to Lily. This lycanthropy. It is debilitating. He works himself to death, Lily, to cope with all of this. When Remus and I saw the house we had to visit. When we were attacked, he flinched a little as a sharp sob came from his left, and Blue-Wit had begun to cry, and was being comforted by Petunia. It showed me just what a threat was to this country. If we don't deal with this now, and in its entirety, then we will be overrun. The only fault I can charge Callias with is conscientiousness. He has demonstrated he can delegate now. Look! He snapped, as the noise of the collected witches and wizards began to grow, and opened his gesture towards Cleus Lupin. Indeed. Friends. Reciprocators. The time to discuss the finer points of this is not now. We are in a crisis situation. Now is the time we need you to pull together to succeed. Tonight, conjurist attacks all over the country have yet again killed and harmed the citizens of this country. He looked across to Petunia. Regulus will return to their ministry? Petunia nodded. He will monitor communications for us. And Mum? Septimus had found his voice at last, looking desperately at his uncle. Yes, of course. And Cecilia? It was Lily's voice that had imitated his. What does that narcissistic, selfish drama queen want now? I would not put it past her to have gone missing deliberately for sympathy. She isn't here for her husband. No one is. Her voice began to quaver, looking towards the space on the floor by the others where Septimus had just been sitting. She withdrew her wand and pointed it to the ceiling. And you. She angled her wand towards her husband. You've caused this. That's not fair, Lily. Petunia had stepped across the floor, past the Christmas tree, past Tunks, Nick, and James, and was standing by her sister, her voice low. Leave me alone. You come here with her? After Sirius ... and Remus ... Does no one care about him? All you care about is avoiding us, and living in your perfect world with your perfect family, your perfect life, your NWRs. Your perfect answers to everything. You had your man, Petunia, oh yes. You were the closest you ever could be to being a proper witch, and when Vernon died, you, martyr, widow, got comforted, poor Petunia. And you had to do all of that by marrying him into wizardry, to give poor Dudley a dad. She pushed past James, wand still raised until she got to the white shocked face of Anne Blue-Wit. And you brought her with you. How generous. Glaring at her sister, she jabbed her wand towards the woman. You accepted her. Her. With what her husband did. With what her son did. Steady now, Lily, James warned. But his wife seemed not to have heard him. And now my Sam, Petunia, cannot get a job anywhere because of the mere suggestion that he has been mixed up with conjurism, on evidence that was discredited. She lowered her wand, and fixed her stare on Anne. Is he out there? Your son? After what he did to Sam? She pointed her finger from her wandless hand towards her second eldest son. Your husband? A known conjurist? Where is he tonight? Do you even know? With the children, Anne returned, her voice hollow, her eyes on the end of Lily's wand, tracking the threat. He'll be. Her face was ashen, all of the color having drained from it, at home. Your family is in no way involved in anything that is happening in the country tonight, Anne, nor is there any suspicion of them being so. They are innocent. Innocent. Spat Lily, then looked at James. And you. You can stop this right now. We're going home. We're not doing anything for these reciprocators again. Lily, calm down, urged Sirius. Go home, James, it's probably a good idea. Then we can organize what we need. But what appeared to be conciliatory words from their host were met with fury as Lily dashed a half-empty glass of pumpkin juice to the floor, shards of glass splintering, some rebounding. Axio-glass, declared Hermione, helpfully as those around the impact leapt out of the way, crying out in annoyance. Lily followed the wake of the spell back to Hermione and was about to take a step towards her when instead she targeted her next volley of rage to the wizard next to her. And you, she concluded to Callias, I am astonished at you. Allowing her here, as well as admitting the half-breeds, that Remus, James and Sirius fought. It was you who, ultimately, signed the bill, Callias. There was a gasp of horror amongst the wizards there. Callias had never before admitted who had had the final say. And yet, that was ministry business. It's true then, Callias? In my capacity as minister, I allowed the legislation through, yes. Lily stared at him in triumph. But, before she could say anything else, Sirius began to clap his hands, beginning slowly then building to normal speed. Lily's expression changed from triumph to confusion as he staggered towards her, clapping ceasing. What are reciprocators for, Lily? Did you ever think of that? Are we just an exclusive club that hangs around here unwilling to get our hands dirty when things get tough? At this, Lily seemed to falter, stealing her look to Sirius, then looking away, tears in her eyes. That was the last time I saw him, Sirius, and then you. She stabbed her finger towards Callias, sent him to his death knowing exactly what was there. You signed the law. Your own brother. Lily. It was James now, his voice, soft, steady, even, though his features betrayed shock. You're a murderer, Callias Lupin. Lily shouted, as her tears flowed. And you. She turned to Sirius and continued, you've changed your tune after you did for Remus what you did. Why don't you tell everyone that now we have their attention? No. Of course. When it's you, you won't. Where did the bottle of polyjuice potion go to, eh? Tell us that. I'm sure Cleus would like to know the security he is so proud of is full of holes. You told me. Don't deny it. Ha. Does she know? Lily, declared Sirius, hoarsely, Remus is Cleus's brother. Don't forget. And the words, just what is he to you? Appeared silently in her mind. Lily glared at her sister, hating her ability. Think of Sam. And Harry. This doesn't have to be discussed here, it can be done in private. Petunia looked at her, reasonably. But Lily did not feel reasonable. Why would I want to do that when Remus lying dead, or as close to death that it makes little difference? Old magic? I don't care. I resign. Every conjurist in the world can come to Britain for all I care and I just don't. Lily? Sirius shouted back, devastation on his face matching her own. But his wife had not finished. Instead, she raised her wand to Callias. What you've done to your brother? She pressed on, tears flowing down her face. The only man who I have ever loved. Go to your lover then, if it will give you peace. I do not want you destroying my house over this. Sirius declared, turning away. So? Lily growled, glaring at all who would dare look her down. But then the point of what she was about to say seemed to disappear from her lips. I will be at St. Mungo's, she declared, a crack accompanying her disapprobation. James stood still, staring fixedly at the spot. Well, it's not a party unless something gets broken, said Mick Mullen to his brother, trying to lighten the mood. Minerva gave him a now is not the time look as James's face drained of all color. Then, he looked around the room, forcing a smile, before leaning over to his friend and saying in a low voice, Sirius, you seemed to imply ... it's something you need to speak to Lily about. But before there was any answer, Molly Weasley spoke for the whole room. Callias, can you tell us just what is going on? Yes, Callias nodded, as ever the consummate politician. There has been a proclamation on behalf of wizards, a proclamation we believe that conjurists are behind, regarding non-wizards. They are claiming that, since the dawn of history, wizards have been repressed by non-wizards ... failing to integrate us, failing to assimilate their communities. They claim recompense for years of repression. They can't do that, declared Benjamin Waggs, outraged. They have. And as they have, therefore they can. And Europe is honor bound to investigate it. Shortly before our party here began, a confederation of conjurists sent a legal protestation European Council of Wizardly Justice against all non-wizards from time immemorial for the persecution against magic practitioners and the suppression and repression of magic, hedge wizards burned as witches. They probably were witches, declared someone. Druids exterminated. Fairy folk driven away from communities and settlements. Ridiculous, whispered Hermione to Harry. Draco will laugh that one out of Strasbourg. It's like Britain suing Denmark and Norway for the Viking raids, or ... Italy for the Roman invasion. So, you can understand that I am needed elsewhere, and that it would not be fair to either the Ministry or you, as reciprocators, to attempt to carry out both roles at the present time. This is a critical state of affairs, he added, now addressing them as if it were a reciprocators' meeting, rather than a Christmas party, albeit a ruined one. James yesterday agreed to be head of the reciprocators in entirety. He will carry out this role, and all I can ask is that you support him in the same way that you supported Severus and I over these last 8 years. Aberforth would be proud of you all. There was silence. A score of people stared back at him, wordlessly. And then a clap began to build, starting at Sirius, which gained momentum until the whole room was applauding, and chanting, James. 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 And then, as ever, the reciprocators began, organizing, discussing, planning, as if that evening's rage and shocking declaration had never been, like it had never been a Christmas party, and with speed and efficiency, knowing that non-wizards were getting caught up in a lot of trouble. Callias stepped over to Severus, his face one of concern. I cannot pursue the breach in memory tampering overtly, Severus, though I thought that I was on my way here with news for Lily and James that Sam was entirely exonerated. He looked past his former colleague, noticing Sam had gone to his father's side and had pitched in with the helping, due to this matter in Europe. Draco will be sensible, we can be assured, but he has to be seen to be doing it by the book. By highlighting this cause legally draws attention to the conjurist cause. I'm not about to add more fuel to it by declaring my findings, but I am almost certain about how the memory alteration came to be ... The same wizards who, I suspect, hold Cecilia, the same who have brought the lawsuit. Then you must leave. Your night will be longer, much longer than ours. When Cleus then disapparated, he caught Harry's eye. Both he and Hermione were as they had been, and had heard everything his mother had said. You were right to give this to me, he reassured them, clutching the blue, velvet clutch bag. Mrs. Lupin is missing. Tonight there have been attacks. Now. As bad as Halloween? maybe worse. But what we have established is that they are different. We cannot detect the source. They don't appear to be using pensieves, so it is going to prove difficult to mount an effective response. Benjamin Werg's flues, they have destroyed the majority of the sporting establishment at Wembley. Madame Lestrange is the quibble pitch for tomorrow is on fire. They will still play, said Tunks with certainty. I have never known Bellatrix give up. She won't leave till it's all right, you watch. Keep me informed, Benjamin, James replied, looking at the report Ben had just handed him. Callias, returning to the very spot he had just left from, collided with Benjamin as he disapparated at the same time. I must speak to you alone, Callias told Severus, a little shaken from the collision. They made their way upstairs to Sirius's father's study. When Severus closed the door, Callias began with an apology. I apologize for the timing of this, due to what has just happened, but I feel my ability to think as I once did, following my transfer of responsibility to James means that my memory diminishes by the minute. That, combined with my symptoms. He rested a hand on one of the bookshelves, one of its inhabitants, lying close to Cleus's hand, snapping at it. He sighed, folding his arms. Who, at Hedgewood's would seek to do Sam Potter harm? Who has the most to gain from his disgrace? Or he was goaded into it? Callias said his questions aloud, but expected no response. It was a good job, as none were offered B.T. Snape. His mother, and sister ... Fraser ''S ... so different to the boy and his father. Their eyes met, Callias's pale blue connecting with Severus's dark brown. We are in accord then. The boy had to have had help. You understand, then, why I cannot investigate the breach of memory security officially. Callias's mouth turned upwards, as if hoping he was displaying a smile on his face. Indeed. It could be all our downfall. It means another traitor in the ministry. Could it be ... after last week? I will reserve judgment until I have evidence, Severus. All I can ask is that you look after Septimus until the arrival of ... well, you know ... take him with you to Hedgewood's, if that's where you'll be over the holidays. I'd ask Mr. A.M.D. Mrs. Scott, but that would not be wise. His safety is of prime concern, and he may endanger them. Additionally, it is close to full moon. He will need his medicine, he will someone who understands. A look of paternal angst etched in the face of Cleus Lupin told Severus Snape all he needed to know about how the head of the ministry felt about the boy, even now, when Septimus's real paternity was in question. When Cleus had departed again, Snape descended the stairs, past Hermione and Harry, who were busy over groupings of wizards and non-wizards who were about to go out as backup to those, it was clear, had already left. Thank you, he said to Harry again, holding up Hermione's bag. These are most valuable. Especially the screaming, I may be able to get an analysis on it. It may shed some light. Snape stepped past them into the living room. Around him the reciprocators and non-wizard reciprocators were at work, the party now abandoned, collaborating, discussing, organizing. We'll stay and help Dad, said Harry, to Hermione, as he looked at his father, no trace of the indiscretion his mother had shared with them that evening on his face. I think the party has pretty much ended. You'll need to, growled Sam, pushing past his big brother, after what Mum did. And, did you hear what Sirius said? I think we all did. I'll go and look after Septimus. I take it he's still upstairs? That's where I saw him go, confirmed Hermione, looking past Harry. Right, sighed Sam, stepping on the worn, oak steps, looking down at them. His head hung as he ascended. I'll get him, said Severus. I need to speak to him about all of this. Past Harry, Severus strode up, making the steps two at a time. A moment later, As Harry and Hermione heard the headmaster of Hedgewood's call Septimus's name, each time more urgently and quieter as he moved further away from the stairs, Sam hurried back down. "He's not up there," he said, stopping before his brother and looking at him carefully. Just then, Callias pushed past them, back again in Grimmauld Place, leaning on the door into the living room so it swung back on its hinges and slammed against the wall. Shouting above the noise of wizards planning, Callias called, "Septimus! Does anyone know where he is?" Mutterings around him proved inconclusive and impatiently he tried again, "Who saw him last?" Upstairs, came Sam's voice, his father's hand on his shoulder. And then he came down. Callias stepped towards him, waiting in forced silence as the boy accessed the sequence of events. And then, he and his friends joined us to play. Sam looked across at the board around which Fred and George were still sitting, diopoli. Then, Sam stopped, and thought, then looked at Callias in the eye. "Then," declared Callias, "we need to find him." "There's something not right about all of this," whispered Hermione to Harry, as the wizards and witches began to tear around the house. "Sam?" she asked, as the boy's downcast face appeared by Harry's shoulder. "Sam," declared Harry. "Wait here, for Septimus," he instructed. "And keep an eye on Dad." Sam looked at Harry, curiously. "Why? Where are you going?" "Out," declared Hermione. "Come on, Ron," she hissed as their friend drifted nearer, his face downcast. "Where, out?" demanded Sam. "Why?" asked Ron and Harry together. "He can't have gone far, he's only young. He will have had to walk." She opened the door of 12, Grimmauld Place with her right hand, the winter night air blowing in. "We're going to look for Septimus Lupin?" questioned Ron as Hermione and Harry stepped onto the first step of the house. Behind them, as if on a hidden set of rails, ready to move the building, number 12 shuddered. "Yes. Will you need to go and tell Freya?" Ron shook his head. "We're over, I think. She did not look too well 10 minutes ago. Tunks and Nick took her home." Hermione gave him a sympathetic look. Behind them, Sam looked more miserable than ever. "Harry, stay with him," she hissed, looking at Harry's brother, sinking down onto one of the steps of the staircase, his head forward and his hands cradling it. "He needs you. Then, find us. In an hour or so. Use a global positioning spell." "Where are we going, then?" Ron asked Hermione, as she pulled him down. "Outside, on the other side of the front door, which she now closed and leaned with a hand against it." Behind them, the building creaked and groaned together, shrinking the volume of the row of terraces, and she pulled her hand away almost as quickly lest she fell over the handrail and down onto the cellar steps of number 14. "Some Christmas Day, eh?" Harry sat down next to Sam on the stairs next to him, patting his hand lightly. "Mum? And Remus Lupin?" Sam turned his red-eyed, red-cheeked face towards Harry, his eyes full of sorrow, his voice full of disbelief. But before Harry could answer, there was a loud crack by the hallway fireplace, a green glow, and, as he stared into the living room, watched the figures appear in sharp contrast compared to their original, blurry, prototypes. "Let them help," declared Anne Blewett as, one by one, the figures came to stand next to her. Harry leaned back from his position on the doorstep of number 12, catching his aunt's face as Anne spoke. "Petunia ... Minister ... What can they do? What can we all do?" Around her, to most people's amazement, stood her husband, son and daughter. Harry watched as his brother, intrigued, stepped into the living room and even more amazed, once he had got to his feet, that his brother had stridden over to Fraser and stuck out a hand. After a brief look down, as if the boy had never seen hands before, Fraser encompassed it with his own, and shook it, smiling generously at his former adversary. 88,888,888. London, Kensington, Newgate. The M25. Septimus's plan had, well, not existed. He had no plan after crossing the threshold of 12, Grimald Place. All he wanted to do was to walk, and walk, and walk. The evening air was chilly now as he walked down a long road, heading southeast, one which looked as if it might take him past the capital and towards ... where. Pausing for a moment, having left Professor Snape's broadcloud at the top end of the street, it had decided that it knew Septimus was not its owner and had bucked and writhed until Septimus had flown it lower and swung himself off, the broom whereupon gave itself a shake, like a wet dog before dashing back off into the cloudy night sky, and he had continued on foot. So many things ... so many disappointments. His mother was not coming. She had been kidnapped by wizards ... Sam and Harry's mum declaring her love for his father. Not to mention the tickly, uncomfortable feeling at the back of his neck which had told him to get the potion that Professor Snape had made for him. A gentle breeze whipped past Septimus as he walked. No mum. No opportunity to ask her about this, anyway. He looked down at his friend Finder and was green in each of his friend's places. At least that was something, Septimus thought as he read a sign, Brixton. At least Dad could be cared for, by Snape, and the street mungo's healers. And, Mrs. Potter? In his mind she was always so happy, smiley, mum-like. And now ... she'd said all those things? Her and his dad? She had said she could be found at St. Mungo's. He shivered, wondering how long it would take him to get to. How far did you think you would get, trudging alone at night, in winter? On Christmas Day, too? His own mind thought the words which were, practically, true as he contemplated his journey south. South. Across the Channel, and closer to his mum. Although it would be like looking for a needle in 100 haystacks, even if he did know where she might at least be. Septimus pressed on, knowing that he must continue. Should he be found by Severus Snape he would send Septimus home. Or to Hedgewood's castle, which was as close to home as Septimus could imagine just at the moment. There or Uncle Kay's cottage. A flash of green, however, brought Severus Snape to him and within seconds his headmaster was standing in front of him. Instinctively, Severus took some steps back, tripping back over a low wall of sandstone blocks which was the border between someone's garden in an old, Victorian terrace and the pavement. Snape waited until he got back to his feet and then, as Septimus began to walk purposefully in the direction he was going just then, Severus Snape fell into step with him. At length, and having crossed two roads using the pedestrian lights, his headmaster turned to him. "Is Mum missing again?" Septimus began, rather than waiting for Snape to say anything. "And are my dad and Mrs. Potter going to get married? And how are you going to cure him?" He paused, glancing sideways towards his head teacher. "You shall find the answers you seek, yet not necessarily walking the streets of London. I mean, I'm ill." Trying to add us to this lycanthropy, sir, he added, pulling at his collar. "Where are you intending on going, Septimus?" growled Snape, his voice like two millstones grinding flour. "To find Mum. To get answers." "And just how, pray?" "You'll see, if you intend on walking with me all the way to Dover." Snape smiled, glancing up the road. "It's 40 miles. "Not you, or anyone will stop me, sir," declared Septimus, hastily. "I always know where I am going. Like Mum," he added. "She always finds her way too." "I have no intention of stopping you," replied Snape, "however, 40 miles is a long way." He fumbled within his robe and handed Septimus a roll of paper. "Take care with this, clearly my confiscating it from you has had its benefits." The boy looked down, unpeeling back the edge of the paper, carefully. It was. "Non-wizard flu powder is untraceable, you need to be, too. So, may you reveal where you intend to go?" Constantine Buttons has an academy in France, Septimus reasoned, screwing up the flu powder and handed it back to Severus. And you said that the professor expert in vampirism works there. Indeed, nodding. Only I have, never used it for traveling, guessed Snape. Well, we had better just get that sorted out now, he opening the ends of the flu powder wrapper carefully and, taking a pinch from the green, crystalline grains, balanced them on his forefinger. When I throw this in the air, you need to wave your wand and state where we intend to go, Snape instructed, standing near his pupil. What do you mean, we? Are you coming with you? Snape smiled a little, the corners of his mouth rising. Just how far do you think you would get on your own? And, at once, Septimus felt a little better, despite the hollowness which he felt had been carved into him as the evening, so full of promise and a different course of events, had turned out so badly. But, said Septimus, drawing his arm back a little, Professor, I must ask you, my lycanthropy. I wanted, he huffed, stopping from his quickened beat of his heart as he thought again of the question, I wanted to ask Mum if it passed on to me from my relatives, or something. Or Dad? Their eyes met for a moment, and then Septimus felt as if the unspoken question in his mind had been sensed by Severus Snape nevertheless. Remus Lupin is your father, rest assured about that. As for your lycanthropy. Yes, it is benign because you inherited it. But should you stop caring for Remus despite your doubts? Is he not your father? Did he not raise you? Did he not nurture you, love you? There was silence, for a time, as Septimus considered this. It is your choice, Septimus. Your Uncle K had asked me to be your guardian over the Christmas period. Critical political happenings are afoot, which may or may not be related to your mother's disappearance. So, where to, Septimus Lupin? Back to Hedgewoods, where the house elves will, no doubt, lavish you with food while you spend Christmas there, with me. His onyx eyes seemed to twinkle as he spoke. Septimus raised his wand again, a parallel action to how the hope in his chest was affecting his heart. Buttons? To find Constantine and seek for your father the answers you crave? Septimus placed his hand on his jeans pocket. Constantine from Romania working in Buttons, the tiny scrap of paper had read, which he had prized from his unconscious father's hand. Septimus offered the small twist of paper to his headmaster. Buttons. There's really no choice, Professor. 88,888,888. Lindvildhalen got off his boat at the holy island of Lindisfarne, a clear, still night illuminating him with stars from the night sky, crossed the causeway onto the mainland and looked towards Berwick, towards the Scottish border. As Boxing Day dawned, Septimus and Severus were almost at the south coast, followed keenly by Hermione, and a little more grudgingly than keenly by Harry and Ron. Pushing all thoughts of the near past to one side in his mind, Lindveld began, here as he was, in his own country, a place where he had not set foot for over 70 years. He put his left foot into the soil of his homeland, then the other and, with just one final glance south, trod north. 88,888,888. Next to Hermione, Harry crackled into existence. She was sitting on the bench not 100 yards from where she had seen Septimus perform his disapparating spell, under the guidance of Severus Snape. He looked at the wake of the green ness, staring into its absence as the light dissipated from its center. Where are they going? To find answers at Buttons, Hermione said, leaning her weary head on her fiancé's shoulder. Commande. What has this got to do with us, Hermione? Demanded Ron, disturbed from his semi-stupor on the other side of Hermione. He is with Snape, after all. These notes of Cecilia's, Hermione replied. Snape left them behind when he went off on his own. I picked them back up to save them from becoming a curiosity in the house, and therefore risking the secret to be told. There's something not right, Harry. She clarified, her last words fierce and strong, getting to her feet and beginning to walk. Then, she turned back round again, sagging onto the cold, metal bench. To their left, sounds that Christmas Day night were finishing up, with groups of people in the Brixton suburb chatting, singing as they returned home from the pub. Since the Vitton, since Henrietta's death. Why did Snape send you the notes anyway? He could have chosen anyone if it was just a safe house he was looking for. Ron looked past Hermione, and to his best friend. She does have a point, Ron said, lethargically. There's something bigger. And it involves you. Somewhere in it, Hermione concluded. There's the Art of the Wise in the downstairs cupboard that I've been using for your work. And, Harry's face turned from one of eagerness to one of disgust. He looked at Hermione. Is it 'cause of that stupid book, isn't it? Asked Ron. Don't remind me. But, mused Hermione, her hair moving in the strong wind, was it just a book? Is there anything deeper in that which? She took in their blank expressions. Not far now, we need to follow them. For weeks? Asked Harry, who was growing tired of being in Hermione's guessing game. What about your job? Hang the job, Harry! Exclaimed Hermione, fiercely. There's something much, much bigger here. I may be able to help. We might be able to help. But, she added, looking at their confused faces, for the moment, just tonight, to catch up, that would be something. I know a spell that can track them, to fine-tune their whereabouts over long distances. It would show us where Septimus is going with Severus. He's going to Expertons. Didn't you hear what he said? There, and to find his mum? You think it's just that? Hermione looked at both of them, astonished. I want to know. We can help. Come on. Jumping up from the park bench, enthusiasm chasing away her early tiredness, Hermione began to stride off in the direction of Septimus and Severus. Though Harry and Ron sat there, getting up only when Hermione turned to wonder why they weren't with her. Well, I'll go on my own then. That was enough to jolt two pairs of legs into submission, as Ron whispered to Harry, she'll need our help, sooner or later. We'll support you, Hermione, of course. At least it will distract me from Dad and Mum's problems.